Marriage would ruin my fun, she giggled when I proposed. I withdrew the ring and vanished. The moment still plays in my head sometimes, crystal clear despite the years that have passed. I'd been planning this proposal for months, convinced I'd found the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I met Chloe at a coffee shop near Johns Hopkins where I worked as a renewable energy consultant. She was this vibrant art teacher with wild curly hair and paint-stained fingers, always talking about wanting to see the world and experience everything life had to offer. After 2.5 years together, I thought we were building toward something permanent. We'd had conversations about the future, about traveling together, about the house we might buy someday. I genuinely believed we were on the same page. For 4 months, I'd been secretly saving every extra dollar to buy the vintage Art Deco ring she'd admired in that antique shop in Fells Point. She'd stopped in front of the display case one Saturday afternoon, tracing the glass with her finger while describing how the geometric design reminded her of the 1920s jewelry her grandmother used to wear. "Someday," she'd whispered, and I'd memorized every detail of that ring. I coordinated with the staff at the historic Botanical Conservatory in Baltimore to have exclusive access to the rare orchid greenhouse during golden hour. This was the same place where we'd first kissed during the spring festival 2 years earlier, surrounded by blooming cherry trees and the sound of jazz drifting from the outdoor stage. It felt like the perfect full-circle moment. The conservatory was ethereal that evening, late spring sunlight filtering through the glass ceiling and casting everything in warm amber tones. Exotic orchids bloomed in impossible colors around us while the humid air carried the scent of tropical flowers. I timed everything perfectly. As we walked among the carefully curated displays, I guided her toward the secluded corner where the rarest specimens grew. "This place is magical," she said, touching a delicate white orchid with purple veins. "I can't believe you got us private access." That's when I dropped to one knee beside a collection of brilliant orange blooms, my heart hammering as I opened the velvet box. The ring caught the light exactly like I'd hoped, the Art Deco diamonds sparkling against the dark fabric. "Chloe," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline, "will you marry me?" She looked down at me, at the ring, and burst into laughter. Not the happy, overwhelmed kind of laughter you hope for during a proposal. This was something else entirely. Pure amusement, like I'd just told her the most ridiculous joke she'd ever heard. "Oh wow, marriage would totally ruin my fun," she exclaimed, covering her mouth but still giggling. "I'm barely 25 and want to backpack through Europe, go to music festivals, and live spontaneously before being tied down to some boring suburban life." An elderly couple tending to nearby flowers had wandered into earshot. They froze awkwardly, the woman's watering can suspended mid-pour as she tried to pretend she wasn't witnessing this disaster unfold. Chloe kept going, apparently oblivious to my expression or the fact that we had an audience. "I mean, you're sweet for asking, but commitment would totally kill my vibe right now. I want to be free to travel whenever I want, to say yes to adventures without checking with someone else first. Marriage is just so permanent and suffocating." I knelt there for what felt like an eternity, the ring box growing heavy in my hands. The orchids that had seemed so romantic moments before now felt like they were mocking me with their exotic beauty. Everything I'd planned, every conversation we'd had about our future, every moment I'd thought we were building something together suddenly felt like a complete misunderstanding. Slowly, I closed the ring box and stood up. The elderly woman had moved closer to her husband, both of them now openly staring with expressions of secondhand embarrassment and sympathy. "You've made your feelings about our future perfectly clear," I said quietly, slipping the box back into my jacket pocket. Chloe's laughter finally died away as she registered my tone. "Wait, you're not upset, are you? I thought you knew I wasn't ready for anything that serious. We're having fun together, isn't that enough?" I looked at her standing there among the tropical flowers, still smiling like this was all some light-hearted misunderstanding, and realized I didn't know her at all. Or maybe I'd been seeing what I wanted to see instead of who she actually was. "No," I said simply. "It's not enough." The walk back through the conservatory felt endless. She chattered nervously behind me, trying to fill the silence with explanations about how we could still have an amazing relationship without rushing into anything crazy. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about the ring in my pocket, about the future I'd imagined that apparently only existed in my head, and about how completely I'd misread everything between us. I drove straight to my brother's house in Annapolis without saying another word to Chloe. The 40-minute drive gave me time to process what had just happened, though my mind kept circling back to her laughter echoing through that greenhouse. My brother Marcus took one look at my face when he opened the door and didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and pointed toward the couch. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation Chloe and I had ever had about the future, wondering how I'd misinterpreted everything so completely. The next morning, I drove to the antique shop in Fells Point before it opened, waiting outside like some kind of desperate stalker until the elderly owner unlocked the door. He recognized me immediately and his face fell when he saw the unopened ring box in my hands. "Sometimes timing just isn't right, son," he said gently, processing the full refund without making me explain the details. I appreciated his discretion more than he probably realized. I used my key to our shared townhouse while Chloe was at her Saturday morning yoga class, moving efficiently through the rooms we'd decorated together. I packed my essentials methodically, leaving behind anything that would require discussion or negotiation. The framed photo of us at last year's Orioles game stayed on the dresser. The books we'd bought together remained on the shelves. I took only what was definitively mine and fit into 2 large duffel bags. I left my apartment key and parking pass on the kitchen counter next to a brief note written on the back of a utility bill. "I'll arrange to get my remaining things later. I hope you find all the adventure you're looking for." No dramatic declarations, no attempts to make her feel guilty. Just a simple acknowledgement that we wanted different things. My phone started buzzing before I'd even reached my car. 17 missed calls by the time I arrived back at Marcus's place. The text messages evolved throughout the afternoon like watching someone's emotional state unravel in real time. First came bewilderment. Was this some kind of test? "Call me." Then defensive justification. "You're being way too dramatic about this. I just need more time to think about marriage." By evening, the panic had set in. "Please come home so we can talk like adults. I don't understand why you're acting like this." I turned my phone off and helped Marcus rebuild his deck instead, finding something therapeutic about the repetitive nature of measuring, cutting, and hammering. Physical work that produced tangible results felt like exactly what I needed after months of emotional investment that had apparently meant nothing. When I finally checked my phone that night, there were 43 messages and 12 voicemails. Chloe had apparently called my parents, my sister, even my work colleagues, telling everyone there had been a huge misunderstanding and that I was overreacting to a simple conversation about timing. She insisted she'd never actually said no to marrying me, just that she needed more time to prepare mentally for such a big step. The voicemail started confident and evolved into something approaching desperation. "Jake, this is crazy. We can work through this. I love you, you know that. Just because I'm not ready for marriage right this second doesn't mean I never will be. Come home and let's figure this out together like we always do." But listening to her voice, I realized she still didn't understand what had actually happened in that greenhouse. She thought this was about timing or her needing space to process. She couldn't see that her laughter had revealed something fundamental about how she viewed our relationship and our future together. To her, my proposal had been premature and poorly timed. To me, her reaction had been a window into her soul. 3 weeks after the proposal disaster, I accepted a transfer opportunity to my company's Portland office that I'd been casually considering for months. What had seemed like an interesting career move suddenly became my escape route from an entire life that felt contaminated by false assumptions and misplaced hope. My supervisor was thrilled that someone finally wanted the West Coast position, and I was grateful for a reason to disappear that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with professional advancement. I blocked Chloe on every social media platform, changed my phone number, and asked our mutual friends to respect my decision for complete no contact. This wasn't about punishment or playing games. I genuinely needed space to figure out who I was when I wasn't constantly trying to convince someone to want the same future I did. The friends who knew us both were surprisingly understanding, probably because they'd witnessed enough of our dynamic to see the fundamental incompatibility I'd been blind to. But Chloe wasn't giving up easily. She started showing up at my former workplace, cornering my colleagues in the parking garage and the coffee shop across the street. My replacement told me she'd come by 3 times in 1 week, insisting there had been a huge misunderstanding and demanding to know where I'd gone. She apparently couldn't comprehend that someone would relocate across the country rather than continue a relationship with her. My sister Emma called me during my 2nd week in Portland to report that Chloe had tracked down her number somehow and spent 40 minutes on the phone explaining her side of the story. She kept saying she never actually rejected your proposal, Emma told me, her voice carefully neutral. She claimed she was just surprised and needed time to process such a big decision. She seems genuinely confused about why you left. What did you tell her? I asked, unpacking boxes in my new apartment while watching the rain paint patterns on the windows. I told her that if she wasn't ready for commitment, she should have communicated that during your many conversations about the future rather than humiliating you in public, Emma said bluntly. I also mentioned that laughing at someone's proposal isn't exactly the response of someone who's just surprised but ultimately interested. Chloe had apparently argued that point extensively, insisting her laughter was nervous excitement, not rejection. She'd painted me as impulsive and dramatic, someone who'd thrown away 3 years over a simple misunderstanding that could have been resolved with better communication. According to Emma, she'd seemed genuinely baffled that I wouldn't return her calls or agree to discuss things rationally. She asked for your new number, Emma continued. I told her that if you'd wanted her to have it, you would have given it to her yourself. Meanwhile, I was discovering that Portland suited me perfectly. The renewable energy sector was booming in the Pacific Northwest, and my Baltimore experience with urban sustainability projects made me valuable to firms working on innovative green building initiatives. I rented a small apartment in the Pearl District with massive windows overlooking the Willamette River, close enough to walk to work but far enough from the city center to feel peaceful. My new colleagues were outdoor enthusiasts who spent weekends exploring the Columbia River Gorge or skiing on Mount Hood. For the first time in years, I found myself saying yes to spontaneous adventures without checking with someone else first. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was living exactly the kind of free, adventurous life Chloe claimed to want, except I was doing it 3,000 miles away from her. Back in Baltimore, according to the friend network I was still connected to, Chloe had become obsessed with tracking my movements. She'd apparently created fake social media accounts to circumvent my blocking, searching for any trace of my new life. She'd shown up at places we used to go together, asking the staff if they'd heard from me. She'd even called my parents' house, something that crossed a line my mother didn't appreciate. She seems to think you're going through some kind of temporary crisis, my dad reported during one of our weekly phone calls. She told your mother that you'd always talked about wanting to travel and that moving to Portland was probably your way of getting the adventure out of your system before settling down with her. The delusion was almost impressive in its scope. Somehow, in Chloe's mind, my permanent relocation had become a temporary rebellion, a phase I needed to work through before returning to Baltimore and the relationship she'd decided we should have. She couldn't fathom that her rejection had been so complete and humiliating that it had fundamentally changed how I saw our entire history together. I hope she finds what she's looking for, I told my dad honestly. But it's not going to be with me. 3 months into my Portland life, Emma texted me a screenshot from Chloe's Instagram story. It was a photo of the Botanical Conservatory where I'd proposed, with the caption, "Some places hold too many memories," followed by a broken heart emoji. She was apparently visiting our old spots like some kind of tragic romantic heroine, documenting her emotional journey for social media sympathy. I deleted the screenshot without saving it and went for a run along the waterfront instead, watching cargo ships navigate the river while the sun set behind the West Hills. That night, I realized I hadn't thought about the proposal in over a week. Portland was becoming home, not just a place I'd fled to, and for the first time since that evening in the greenhouse, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. 6 months into my Portland life, I was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. I joined a weekend rock climbing group that met every Saturday at Smith Rock State Park, about 2 hours southeast of the city. There's something profoundly clarifying about hanging off a cliff face, where your only concerns are the next handhold and trusting your equipment. The group was a mix of software engineers, teachers, and outdoor gear company employees who became the first real friends I'd made as an adult without Chloe's influence or approval shaping the dynamic. I also discovered a passion for landscape photography during these climbing trips. The Pacific Northwest offered endless subjects, from the dramatic basalt columns at Smith Rock to the misty forests of the Coast Range. I invested in a decent camera setup and started documenting our weekend adventures, finding something meditative about capturing the interplay of light and shadow on ancient rock formations. Photography forced me to slow down, to really observe my surroundings instead of constantly planning the next step forward. My therapist, Dr. Walsh, helped me understand that my relationship with Chloe had followed patterns I'd learned in childhood, where I equated love with trying to convince someone to value what I offered. We worked through my tendency to overinvest in relationships where the other person remained emotionally distant, and I began recognizing the difference between someone who appreciated my efforts and someone who simply accepted them as their due. "You've spent the last 3 years trying to prove you were worth choosing," Dr. Walsh observed during one of our sessions. "What would it look like to be with someone who already knew your value without needing constant evidence?" Meanwhile, back in Baltimore, Chloe's social media had transformed into a carefully curated display of her adventure-filled single life. Emma would occasionally send me screenshots when the posts became particularly ridiculous, and the evolution was fascinating to watch from a psychological distance. Photos from expensive trips to Iceland and Thailand appeared regularly, always with captions about living authentically and following your heart. She'd apparently blown through her savings account funding these spontaneous getaways, each trip more elaborate than the last. Her Instagram stories featured a rotating cast of male companions at trendy restaurants, music festivals, and weekend beach trips. Everything was documented with hashtags like #LivingMyBestLife and #NoRegrets, but there was something desperate about the frequency of posts. She was sharing every mundane moment like she needed constant validation that her choices were correct. "She keeps bringing you up at parties," my friend David reported during one of our monthly phone calls. "She'll be talking to some new guy about her travels, and then suddenly she's explaining how she dodged a bullet with someone who wanted to trap her in suburbia before she'd experienced real life." But according to David, these same conversations invariably led to her asking if anyone had heard from me, where I was living, whether I was dating anyone. She'd apparently convinced herself that I was going through some kind of quarter-life crisis and would eventually return to Baltimore once I'd gotten the rebellion out of my system. "She seems genuinely shocked that you haven't contacted her," David continued. "Like she expected you to get lonely and realize she was right about needing more time. She keeps saying you were always the stable, predictable type who'd wait for her to come around." The irony was incredible. While she was documenting her spontaneous lifestyle for social media validation, I was actually living the adventurous life she claimed to want, exploring wilderness areas every weekend, taking photography workshops, learning technical climbing skills, and building genuine friendships with people who shared my interests. The difference was that I wasn't performing my adventures for an audience, I was simply enjoying them. 9 months after leaving Baltimore, I got promoted to senior consultant, leading a team that designed renewable energy systems for major commercial developments throughout the Pacific Northwest. The work was challenging and meaningful, exactly the kind of career growth I'd hoped for but hadn't prioritized while I was focused on navigating Chloe's emotional needs and constantly changing priorities. My new apartment in the Hawthorne district was twice the size of my Baltimore place, with hardwood floors and enough space for a proper home office where I could edit my photography. I'd started submitting some of my landscape shots to outdoor magazines, and several had been published in regional climbing guides. Life felt full in a way it hadn't for years. But the most telling update came through Emma, who'd run into Chloe at a mutual friend's birthday party. "She looks exhausted," Emma reported. "Like she's been trying too hard for too long." She spent most of the night talking about her upcoming trip to Bali, but when I asked about her job, she got really vague. "I think she might have quit to travel full-time, which seems financially impossible unless she's found someone else to fund her lifestyle." Emma paused before continuing. "She asked about you again. Wanted to know if you were still in Portland, if you seemed happy, whether you'd mentioned missing Baltimore." When I told her you'd gotten promoted and seemed to be building a real life there, she got this look on her face like she'd just realized something unpleasant. What kind of look? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Like maybe you weren't coming back after all. That weekend, I stood on the summit of Mount Adams with my climbing group, watching the sunrise paint Mount Rainier gold in the distance. I thought about Chloe's Instagram posts with their forced enthusiasm and calculated spontaneity, and I felt genuinely grateful that her rejection had freed me to discover what I actually wanted from life. She'd been right about one thing. Marriage to her would have ruined all the fun, just not for the reasons she'd imagined. 2 years after relocating to Portland, I met Harper at a marine biology conference where my company was presenting renewable energy solutions for coastal research facilities. She was delivering a presentation about ocean acidification research, and I found myself genuinely fascinated by her work studying how climate change was affecting Pacific Northwest marine ecosystems. After her talk, I approached her with questions about how renewable energy infrastructure could better support remote research stations, and we ended up talking for 3 hours over terrible conference coffee. Harper was everything Chloe wasn't, starting with the fact that she had clear, long-term goals and the discipline to pursue them methodically. She'd completed her PhD in marine biology at UC San Diego, spent 2 years in Antarctica studying polar marine life, and now worked for a research institute focused on preserving endangered ocean ecosystems. She was brilliant, driven, and had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you want to accomplish. Our first real date was a weekend camping trip to the Oregon coast, where she could show me tide pools while I photographed the dramatic rock formations at Cannon Beach. I watched her explain the intricate relationships between sea anemones and hermit crabs with the same passion I felt when discussing sustainable energy systems, and I realized I'd never dated someone whose professional enthusiasm matched my own. I want to have kids someday, she told me during our second month together, as we cooked dinner in her small but efficiently organized apartment. Not immediately, but definitely within the next 5 years. I know that's something people usually dance around in new relationships, but I figure there's no point in wasting time if we want completely different futures. The directness was refreshing after years of trying to decode Chloe's ever-changing priorities and carefully avoiding topics that might make her feel pressured. Harper approached relationships the same way she approached her research, with clear hypotheses, honest data collection, and logical conclusions based on evidence. I want kids too, I told her, and marriage, eventually, with someone who actually wants to build something together. Good, she said simply. Then we're compatible on the important stuff. Our relationship developed organically through shared activities that we both genuinely enjoyed. Weekend camping trips to study marine life and photograph coastal landscapes. Cooking classes where we learned to prepare sustainable seafood. Volunteering at the Oregon Coast Aquarium's rescue program for injured seals and sea otters. Every experience felt natural and unforced, two people discovering they wanted to explore the world together. 8 months into our relationship, I made my Instagram account public for the first time since leaving Baltimore, posting photos from our camping adventures and Harper's research expeditions. The images showed genuine happiness. Harper teaching rescued seal pups to swim, both of us laughing around a campfire after a day of tide pool exploration, sunrise shots from our tent overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Within hours of making the account public, I noticed several new follower requests from accounts with generic usernames and no profile photos. Then Harper showed me something that made my blood run cold. Comments appearing on our photos from an account called Ocean_Wanderer_2025, making cryptic remarks about rebounds and people who settle for less than real passion. This person seems to know you, Harper said, scrolling through the increasingly erratic comments. Look at this one. Some people move across the country to avoid dealing with their real feelings. Hope you're not just a geographic cure. I screenshot the comments before blocking the account, but more appeared from similar fake profiles. Hope she knows she's competing with memories of someone who actually challenged you to grow. Must be nice dating someone safe after experiencing real chemistry. Rebounds always feel perfect until the novelty wears off. The writing style was unmistakably Chloe's, with her particular combination of passive aggression and pseudo-psychological analysis. She'd apparently spent 2 years monitoring my social media through fake accounts, waiting for me to post something that would give her an opening to insert herself back into my life. "This is harassment," Harper said bluntly, after I explained the full history. "And it's also pathetic. She rejected your proposal, you moved on, and now she's cyberstalking you because you're happy with someone else." We blocked every suspicious account and made my profile private again, but the damage to my peace of mind was already done. Knowing that Chloe had been watching my life from a distance for 2 years felt violating in a way I hadn't expected. More disturbing was the realization that she'd convinced herself I was rebounding or running away from my feelings for her, rather than simply building a better life with someone who shared my values. Through mutual friends, I learned that Chloe's behavior had become increasingly erratic over the past year. She'd sabotaged 3 serious relationships since our breakup, each time panicking when the men mentioned long-term commitment or wanted to introduce her to their families. According to David, she developed a pattern of dating men for 3 to 6 months, then finding reasons to end things whenever the relationship moved toward genuine intimacy or future planning. She told her last boyfriend that she needed to focus on her career, David reported, but then quit her teaching job 2 weeks later to become a travel blogger. She's been living off credit cards and occasional freelance work, posting content about authentic living while staying in hostels and cheap Airbnbs. The most telling detail came from Emma, who'd heard from Chloe's sister that she'd been in therapy for the past year, apparently trying to understand why she couldn't maintain stable relationships. Her therapist asked her to identify what she actually wanted in a partner, Emma explained, and she broke down crying because she realized she kept comparing everyone to you. Specifically, Emma continued, she told her sister that she'd sabotaged every relationship because none of the guys planned thoughtful dates or remembered details about her interests the way you used to. She apparently described you as the only man who ever made her feel truly seen and valued. I shared this information with Harper, who listened with the analytical detachment of a scientist studying an interesting but irrelevant phenomenon. So she rejected commitment when she had it, spent 2 years convincing herself she wanted freedom, and now she's realized that what she actually wanted was security with someone who cared about her enough to pay attention, Harper summarized. That's unfortunate for her, but it doesn't change anything about us. That night, lying in bed after Harper had fallen asleep, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 2 years earlier, I'd been desperately trying to convince someone to want the future I offered. Now I was with someone who not only wanted that future but was actively helping me build an even better version of it than I'd originally imagined. 3 years after the botanical garden proposal disaster, Harper and I decided to get married. There was no dramatic proposal scene, no months of secret planning or expensive ring shopping. Instead, it happened during a quiet evening in her apartment while we were reviewing research grant applications together. She looked up from her laptop and said, "I think we should get married next year. We both know this is what we want, and I'd like to start trying for kids before I turn 32. "That sounds perfect," I replied, and meant it completely. We spent the next hour discussing practical details like venue options, budget considerations, and timeline coordination with her research schedule. It was exactly the kind of straightforward, collaborative planning that I'd always imagined marriage decisions should involve. We chose the Columbia River Gorge for our wedding venue, an outdoor ceremony overlooking the dramatic basalt cliffs where we'd spent so many weekends exploring together. The guest list was small and intentional. Close family, genuine friends who'd supported our relationship, and colleagues who'd become part of our extended community. Harper's maid of honor was her research partner from graduate school, someone who understood her professional passion and personal values equally well. The ceremony itself felt like a celebration of something we'd already built together rather than a promise about some uncertain future. When Harper walked down the aisle wearing her grandmother's simple pearl necklace and a dress she'd chosen because it would be comfortable for outdoor photography afterward, I felt none of the nervous anxiety I'd experienced before proposing to Chloe. This was just the logical next step in a relationship that had always made sense. Our honeymoon was a photography expedition through New Zealand's South Island, combining Harper's interest in temperate marine ecosystems with my growing passion for landscape photography. We spent 2 weeks camping in remote locations, documenting the intersection of mountains and ocean while Harper collected water samples for a collaborative research project. Every morning felt like Christmas, waking up to new terrain and endless photographic possibilities. The trip produced some of my best work yet, images that captured both the stark beauty of the landscape and Harper's genuine enthusiasm for discovery. Watching her collect specimens in tide pools while I photographed the interplay of light and water, I realized we'd created exactly the kind of adventurous partnership I'd always wanted, where both people's passions enhanced the experience rather than competing for attention. Meanwhile, back in Baltimore, Chloe was apparently having a very different kind of experience with commitment. According to Emma, she'd impulsively eloped in Las Vegas with a cryptocurrency investor named Brett whom she'd known for only 3 months. The wedding photos on social media featured forced smiles and over-the-top captions about, "Finally finding someone who matches my energy," and "When you know, you know." The whole thing screams panic, Emma observed during one of our post-wedding phone calls. She's approaching 30 and watching all her friends settle into serious relationships. I think she grabbed the first guy who seemed financially stable and exciting enough to make her feel like she wasn't falling behind. The marriage lasted exactly 14 months. Through the friend network, I learned that Brett and Chloe had fought constantly about money, lifestyle choices, and her refusal to discuss having children beyond vague someday statements. He'd apparently expected her to be the adventurous free spirit she'd portrayed during their whirlwind courtship, while she'd expected him to provide the financial security that would allow her to quit working and focus on her travel blog full-time. She wanted him to fund her Instagram lifestyle, David reported with obvious amusement, but he wanted a partner who would contribute to building actual wealth together. Sound familiar? The divorce was messy and public, with Chloe posting bitter quotes about people changing after marriage and learning you can't force compatibility with someone who doesn't share your values. Brett's social media told a different story, with posts about emotional availability and the difference between loving someone and loving the idea of someone. In one particularly revealing Instagram story that Emma screenshot for me, Chloe had written, "Sometimes you think you want adventure and excitement, but what you really need is someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. Lessons learned the hard way." The post was deleted within hours, but not before several mutual friends had seen it and drawn their own conclusions about what she'd actually learned from the experience. By the time Harper and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary with a weekend camping trip to Crater Lake, Chloe was apparently living with her sister in Baltimore, working part-time at a yoga studio while trying to rebuild her financial stability after the expensive divorce. Her travel blog had been abandoned, her Instagram had shifted to inspirational quotes about self-discovery and healing, and according to mutual friends, she'd sworn off dating entirely to focus on personal growth. She keeps talking about how she needs to figure out what she actually wants before getting involved with anyone else, Emma reported. But from what her sister says, she spends most of her therapy sessions talking about relationship patterns and missed opportunities. Harper found these updates mildly interesting from an anthropological perspective but ultimately irrelevant to our life together. "Some people need to lose something before they can appreciate what they had," she observed. "But that doesn't mean they deserve to get it back." We were building something completely different from what I'd attempted with Chloe. Our relationship was based on shared goals, mutual respect, and genuine compatibility rather than physical attraction and wishful thinking about fundamental personality changes. When Harper got excited about a new research opportunity or I landed a challenging photography assignment, we celebrated each other's successes without feeling threatened or competitive. The contrast became even more obvious when we started seriously discussing having children. Harper approached parenthood the same way she approached everything else, with careful research, honest communication about expectations, and realistic planning about how kids would fit into our existing life structure. There were no dramatic declarations about being ready or not ready, just practical conversations about timing, finances, and how we'd balance career responsibilities with family obligations. "I love that we can talk about the future without it feeling like I'm pressuring you," Harper said one evening as we reviewed potential names and discussed nursery logistics. With my ex in grad school, any mention of long-term plans made him panic like I was trying to trap him into something he didn't want. I want everything we're planning, I told her honestly. Kids, the house we're looking at, growing old together while you save marine ecosystems and I document them through photography. None of this feels like settling or compromise. That night, looking at Harper as she read research papers in bed, I felt profoundly grateful that Chloe had rejected my proposal in that greenhouse 3 years earlier. Her laughter had been the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it hadn't felt that way at the time. On our 3rd wedding anniversary, Harper and I welcomed twin daughters into the world. Sophia and Elena arrived 3 weeks early but perfectly healthy, and I'll never forget the moment Harper held them both while exhausted tears streamed down her face. "We made them together," she whispered, and I knew she wasn't just talking about biology but about everything we'd built as partners that had led to this moment. The twins transformed our lives in exactly the ways we'd anticipated and prepared for, which felt like a small miracle after watching so many friends struggle with the chaos of unplanned parenthood. We'd spent months baby-proofing our Craftsman house in southeast Portland, converting Harper's former home office into a nursery while building a new marine biology lab in the basement where she could continue her research between maternity leave periods. I set up a darkroom in the basement workshop space, finally having enough room to develop my film photography properly instead of relying entirely on digital processing. The house had a large backyard where Harper immediately started an organic vegetable garden, explaining to the babies about soil chemistry and nutrient cycles while they slept in their portable carriers beside the raised beds. Our social media presence became a genuine documentation of family life rather than a performance for external validation. Photos of Harper teaching the twins to crawl among her research specimens, family camping trips with portable cribs and baby-wearing hiking, quiet evenings where we'd read scientific journals together while the girls played with educational toys on the living room floor. Everything felt authentic and unforced, 2 scientists raising future scientists in an environment that valued curiosity and learning. The twins inherited Harper's analytical nature and my attention to detail, showing early signs of systematic thinking that delighted us both. Sophia would line up her blocks in precise patterns while Elena methodically tested the structural integrity of every toy tower she built. Harper documented their developmental milestones with the same rigor she applied to her research, creating detailed charts about their problem-solving abilities and social interactions. "They're going to be incredible women," Harper said one evening, watching 18-month-old Sophia figure out how to open a child-proof cabinet while Elena observed and took mental notes for her own attempt. Independent, curious, confident in their own intelligence. Our 5th wedding anniversary fell on the same weekend as the twins' 2nd birthday, so we decided to combine celebrations with a family camping trip to the coast. Harper wanted to introduce the girls to tide pools, and I was excited to photograph their first encounters with marine life. We'd upgraded our camping equipment to accommodate 2 toddlers, but the essential dynamic remained the same, Harper explaining natural phenomena while I captured the wonder on everyone's faces. The morning of our anniversary, while Harper was teaching the twins to identify different types of seaweed, my phone buzzed with an Instagram direct message from an account I didn't recognize. The profile photo showed a woman with shorter, darker hair than I remembered, but the username made my stomach drop, Chloe_herself. "I saw your anniversary post and had to reach out," the message began. "I know this is probably weird after all these years, but I've been thinking about us a lot lately. About what we had together and how I handled things back then." I screenshot the message and handed my phone to Harper, who was helping Sophia examine a hermit crab while Elena collected shells in a small bucket. "Should I read this?" Harper asked, glancing at the username. "Yes. I want you to know what she's saying." Harper read silently for a moment, then looked up with an expression of scientific curiosity mixed with mild disgust. "She's really doing this? After 5 years, a marriage, kids, and your obvious happiness with someone else?" The message continued for several paragraphs, a carefully crafted confession about how rejecting my proposal had been the biggest mistake of my entire life. She claimed to have spent years in therapy learning that adventure and commitment weren't mutually exclusive, that watching successful couples travel and explore together had made her realize she'd been afraid of vulnerability rather than marriage itself. "I see the photos of you and Harper exploring together, raising those beautiful babies," Building exactly the kind of life I convinced myself I didn't want, the message continued. I know now that I was wrong about everything. I wasn't too young for marriage. I was too immature to recognize what real partnership looked like. She asked if we could reconnect as friends, since she was finally ready for what really matters. She mentioned being single for over a year while focusing on personal growth, working with a therapist to understand her relationship patterns, and learning to value stability and genuine connection over excitement and novelty. She's basically describing everything you offered her 5 years ago, Harper observed, bouncing Elena on her hip while reading over my shoulder. She rejected commitment, spent years chasing the opposite, and now wants to circle back to what she originally had available. The message ended with a request to meet for coffee if I was ever in Baltimore, just to talk and clear the air between us. She claimed to harbor no expectations beyond friendship, but wanted me to know that she understood now what she'd thrown away and how much she regretted her immaturity during that difficult time in our relationship. I looked at Harper, who was helping both twins examine tide pool creatures with a magnifying glass, pointing out the intricate details of sea anemone tentacles and explaining how different species adapted to survive in harsh coastal environments. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon sunlight as she gestured, and I could see our daughters absorbing every word with the focused attention they'd inherited from both parents. "What do you want to do?" Harper asked, settling both girls on the sand with their collection buckets while we talked. "Delete it," I said without hesitation, "and block the account." Harper smiled and handed me back my phone. Good choice. Though I have to admit, from a psychological perspective, the timing is fascinating. 5th anniversary, twins, obvious domestic happiness. She's seeing everything she convinced herself she didn't want. That evening, while Harper sang lullabies to Sophia and Elena in the tent we'd set up 20 feet from the tide line, I deleted Chloe's message without responding and blocked her account completely. Outside, waves crashed against the rocks where we'd spent the day exploring together as a family, and I could hear the twins' contented babbling as they settled into sleep. I thought about Chloe sitting somewhere alone, scrolling through photos of the life she'd rejected, finally understanding what she'd lost but 5 years too late to matter. Her message had revealed everything about her current mindset. She'd spent half a decade learning lessons I tried to teach her when we were together, and now she wanted credit for personal growth that had come at the expense of our relationship. But watching Harper kiss both girls goodnight before settling beside me in our sleeping bag, I realized Chloe's message was actually a gift. It confirmed that her rejection in that botanical greenhouse had been the greatest favor anyone had ever done for me, freeing me to find someone who wanted the same beautiful, adventurous life I'd always dreamed of building, just with the right partner.